Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 634. I'm Tom Kegley, your host. In this edition of the SPaMCAST, I talk with Rick Hall, CEO of Aginity. Rick and I talked about analytics, which has been Rick's lifelong passion. Rick provides insights on how analytics fit into a modern organization and how to staff that group. We also discuss serial entrepreneurship. His advice? If you don't have the passion for the idea, don't try it. Rick Hall is a software entrepreneur focused on the analytics market. He has led and developed over a dozen software products and taken several companies from early stage to eventual sale. Rick led a group in a purchase of Aginity in March of 2020 and has taken over as CEO as a result. Aginity was an early innovator in analytics management and launched Aginity Pro early last year. Are you ready to peer into analytics? It's time for the interview. Rick Hall, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate being here.
I think this is going to be fun. Rick, before we get too far into this, because I think we could probably get into the weeds a bit about analytics, the firm that you're currently a CEO of, all of that stuff. But let's start with sort of the definition of analytics. 18 people in a room, you ask them, you probably get 19, 20 definitions. How do you define that?
Yeah, I think it's the process of using information to improve decisions. And, we've kind of come from this world where all kinds of terminology is thrown around, whether it's business intelligence or AI or machine learning. And so, I've settled on using this word analytics because I think it kind of encompasses all of that. And it's the process of really gathering information and using that information to improve decisions. That's how I would put it.
It's that whole circle then. If we just gathered it and analyzed it and didn't use it, what value would it be?
Yeah. It's the decisions that are either made by people or in some cases and maybe increasingly made by machines. But it's the decisions that is where the value lies.
Why are we at this point of discussion now versus 5 years from now? Or probably more important, why weren't we having this discussion 5 years ago?
Well, I think we were having it 5 years ago, but it's changed a lot in its nature. So, 5 years ago, we were trying to process very structured data and generate reports. And so dashboards and, intelligent reporting was, kind of the thing 5 years ago and even 10 years ago. And really in the past 5 years, we've seen this resurgence of this category of AI, most of which is really machine learning. The science behind that has been around. Much of the algorithms have been around for, multiple decades, but we really didn't have the processing power to really utilize that data. And of course, with computers now being embedded in almost everything, we have this accompanied explosion of data. So we have an explosion of data. We have more processing power to use that data. We have the cloud, which gives us elastic scaling, so we can scale to really large workloads from really small workloads relatively easily. And I think all those factors have come together to make it really important today.
So is this a tool software discussion or is this a people discussion?
Well, I think there's a big piece of it, which is certainly a tool discussion. But yeah, people are really critical. And I would say one of the things that I've spent a lot of my time on is trying to understand what is it about how we employ analytics that's made it so difficult to do it well. And I think that a lot of that does come down to people and down to people and a couple different roles in an organization, which don't always work together well. So you kind of have an engineer mindset which wants to build things in a highly structured way. And you have a business, let's call them a business analyst mindset, which is, I've got to answer this question right now. And these two different forces, the business person asking the question and the engineer trying to build structure, have kind of not always worked together well. And I think that probably some of why analytics is a struggle for many organizations is related to that.
Well, how do we get to a point where that actually can happen then? If that's having known and still knowing people that fit in both of those camps, I could say that I don't know that that's a solved problem yet.
No, I don't think it's entirely a solved problem. I think it's what a lot of people are trying to solve. It certainly is kind of the space that where we're doing innovation. I would say a couple things have happened. So one thing is that up until a couple of years ago, our primary paradigm for organizing data was to do something we'd call a data warehouse. Mm-hmm. And in building a data warehouse, we would put all the business logic into the process of getting the data and loading the data into a fashion that we could consume. And all the rules about that data were put, kind of upstream. So if you wanted to answer a specific question quickly over and over again, a data warehouse was really well designed to do that. And we changed to a process where we're using, data lakes and other ways of processing data where we're loading the data up more in its native state and allowing business users and engineers to get to that data more natively and use it to answer a bunch of different questions so that it's not just one question, but many questions. Now, you have this problem, the engineer mindset that wants to, kind of structure the data, and the analyst mindset that wants to answer a question. And how do those two work together? Mm-hmm. Well, this technology that's moved from this pure data warehousing world to this, data lake and, new type of world makes that easier, but you still need to put the two together and to collaborate, right? And, I think this collaboration is really kind of critical. And many have tried to apply an engineering mindset to the analysts and say, we're going to let the business analysts use these engineering type tools. And I think I've kind of come to view that analytics is not an engineering problem. It's much more of a biology problem, that it evolves iteratively and not in a way that's predetermined. So, if you think about this year, a year ago, if you were the head of sales for a consumer goods company, you have your analytics system all built and it's answering. So a year ago, you have this analytics system all built and it's answering a set of questions. And along comes COVID and suddenly you have this virus. And so you're the head of sales and you say, well, shoot, I got to figure out what this virus is doing to my sales. So you go back to your engineering team and you say, hey, can you load up this infected data into the data warehouse so I can question? And the engineering department says, absolutely, I'll have that for you in 3 months. And you're like, well, I gotta stock the store next week. Right. So you get some business guy or woman who works in your department who has the title analyst, and you say to them, pull the data out of the data warehouse and take this other data and figure out an answer to the impact of, test positivity sales. And so you're answering a question in real time that has to evolve quickly. And you have a business analyst who has to perform that job. This large engineered data pipeline just can't keep up with your need to change. And so what I think is kind of happening, which is interesting change in the world, is that we have to empower these business analysts to build capabilities themselves to collaborate with the engineers but they can't be dependent on the engineers for everything. And in fact, they're not. The fact is that businesses have these people. They sit in the line of business. They're not in IT. They're answering the question today that wasn't built into this structure. And so, I think you have this interesting people problem. I think that applying an engineering mindset to answer all business questions is never going to work. I think you have to support collaboration between these two roles. And I think that you need to bring more of a evolutionary and kind of a governed mindset as opposed to a predefined approach.
So at what point, if we go down that path of empowering the analyst role to basically create or gather this data, look at it, own it, at what point do they start building their own infrastructure that then has to be, the engineer group has to come back and say, well, at some point you have to actually live with this stuff and somebody has to own it. How does that actually happen?
So first off, they've already done that. Cat's out of the bag.
Oh, yeah.
These business analysts have built this stuff all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
We have to recognize that if we assume everything we build is going to be done in this very engineered way, they're going to continue to do that, right? And there's no stopping them because they're trying, and they're not doing it because they're somehow bad people or not working in the interest of the corporation. They're trying to answer real questions today, right? So one thing is you have to give them the same tool set where they can facilitate doing that work on their own. And these new analytic platforms do that. And that's great. But then you have to create a process of what I call evolutionary governance, right? Where the analysts can evolve their need to answer business questions, but it can be incorporated back into, the structure. So we had a conversation recently with one of the biggest retailers in the world. And through the conversation, the retailer indicated to us, well, they have 35 different ways to measure coupon counts. Right? So, well, if you have 35 different ways, at least 34 of them are wrong. Right? And you're making these bad decisions because you got all these wrong calculations. Well, those calculations evolved in the business because this structure, this engineered structure, could not keep up with the needs of the business to evolve. So you have to let the business analysts do this work. You have to provide a structure that lets them do that work. And then you have to have a way of picking the process that works effectively, right? So a business analyst isn't going to create his own way of counting coupons if that analytic is available to them and they can incorporate it into whatever else they're doing. So that collaboration is key. Having a platform that allows for that is key. And that's the place where our innovation exists, where the Aginity is about this collaboration between these roles.
So is that a software solution or is it a process solution? How does something like Aginity fit into that and make those two things happen and create that governance structure?
Well, also it's part of it's software and part of it is process. So let's start with the software side. So one of the things that's happened is we have these big analytic platforms that are now highly scalable. So, you hear a lot about Snowflake. They just recently had an IPO, or Amazon's Redshift, or Microsoft Synapse. There's a bunch of them out there. And these things house enormous amounts of data. They'll process it in a highly elastic manner, and they'll let you build more and more complicated calculations in. What we do is we provide a tool set that sits on top of that structure where both the analysts and the engineers can build their logic and collaborate through a catalog, which is a governed framework, or can be governed for managing analytic content. And it's the catalog is the framework, but you still actually have to have a process around it, your question, defining what becomes the governed or the promoted calculation, right? So it's one thing to say, engineers, analysts, we're going to manage our content in this catalog. Engineers are going to build the pipelines to do the core stuff. The analysts are going to be able to add their stuff to that as they go, as they need to answer questions. But you have to have a process that then looks at those two and evolves the framework. And software isn't going to solve that problem on its own, right? It's got to be software and people.
If you were to build an analytics team within an organization, what are the critical skills that you think are needed?
Well, so the first thing is, I would just say innate curiosity, right? That the art of analytics is an experimental process, and it's about being able to look at the details of information and build calculations and use them effectively. So you have to have that core curiosity and interest in, kind of information. You have to have people who really love the business decisions and the process they're trying to improve, right? So the pure engineering mindset sometimes is very focused on the elegance of a calculation. The analyst mindset is focused on the value of answering the question, and you need both of those skill sets in an analytic organization. And of course, you have to have programming skills, and you have to have data science skills, and all those things are part of the structure. So you have this wide variety of capabilities. I think anywhere in business today, you have to have people who are collaborative, right? It's a team sport. Analytics is a team sport. So even the super smart data scientist who can't get along with anybody else, or analyst or engineer, any role is going to be a problem in a effective organization.
It's funny you got to that last. I was sitting here going, well, we've gotten down that list, and that's a cool list, but we've really been focusing on how the two bits of the organization have to work together. So yeah, and I guess that is just almost table stakes at this point. The whole idea of collaboration. Where would you put it? Is this, if it's reacting to the business, hopefully in real time, answering and having that link back to the business solution, or answering those questions, I would be definitely afraid to put it in the engineering department. I mean, it's obviously, I think this has to be close to where the questions are being asked.
Yeah, I think that, so I actually think it spans both sides of the organization, and it kind of has to. And to some extent, you could kind of say the engineer is going to sit in the technology organization and the analyst is going to sit in the business organization. And you're going to build an analytics team which spans the two, and these individuals are going to probably report up in different ways. I've heard on your podcast, you've talked about, agile team structure, in several things. And it's this kind of same mindset of the role maybe belongs, to one part of the organization, but the squad is, this cross-functional team, people in, the technology world and people in the business world that are going to collaborate. That's how I would see it.
Okay. Interesting.
Does that make sense? Do you buy that?
Partially. I worry where we end up with boundaries, right? And you have a team that has two masters, people that have, they're getting paid differently. Their success is different. And I guess if it's all within the organization, that's probably manageable. But that would be my worry about not making it one sort of insular team. And I do like the idea of cross-functional team.
I'm a fan of OKRs, and, you set an objective and a key result, and that's going to be what the squad is responsible to.
Okay.
And their rewards should be based on your ability to succeed with that objective. But the horizontal aspect, I report up to engineering, was going to be more about, career path and skills and, kind of competency and quality. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to have this cross-functional team, they can't have to report and respond to the horizontal. They have to respond to the objective,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
That would be my take.
Yeah, I buy that. That if we layer that in, I think that's a workable scenario because it does focus people on what they're trying to achieve, not who they're trying to impress for their next annual review kind of scenario.
Yeah. And it's tricky because, there is a tremendous amount of complexity with analytics.
Mm-hmm.
I got to get this data from all these different sources. It's coming at high speed and I've got to load it somewhere and I've got to make sure that I'm not dealing with duplicates and et cetera, et cetera. And that's an engineering problem, right? And it requires engineering discipline and knowledge. But all of that work is for naught if you're not answering business questions.
When they're needed.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not going to be able to do that without that kind of business mindset, right? Mm. And so I think if you stick analytics in one or the other bucket, inevitably you're going to overemphasize and over-index to one role. So I think you need cross-functional collaboration, and I think that's critical to success.
Well played. No, excellent. I have seen organizations actually start to consider outsourcing the whole idea of analytics. Is that a coming trend that you see in the marketplace? And what do you think the pluses and minuses or upsides and downside risks are?
Yeah, so, kind of this is where I probably get myself in trouble. I think that's problematic. And I think it's problematic for a couple different reasons. I mean, one is that, organizations are living, breathing, kind of entities, right? And so, it's very difficult to write into a contract something that says evolve as needed, right? Our scope is X, Y, and Z plus evolve as needed, right?
How do you litigate something like that if you had to?
Yeah, I don't know how you do. And I think, and I've seen organizations have big outside analytic functions. In fact, I've worked at one, but it became a staffing function. Mm-hmm. And, so they were basically paying for bodies that had a certain skill set. And if you do that, I think you probably actually they're really part of your organization, right? Because you're managing a certain number of people. But I think if you just say, we're going to outsource the whole thing, you go solve our problems, I think that's difficult. On the other hand, analytic talent is hard to come by. So, it's a challenge. Some organizations think, well, I just can't do this on my own and I need to, find somebody to do it. And I would kind of advocate for either building it with a partner where the partner is not concerned about, a scope, but providing you a skill set that you can incorporate, or I would look to be building it myself.
Yeah, at some point, I think you learn a lot about you working through the analytics, and that if that information is, while all information and all people are portable, if it is even more dynamic, it could just leave without creating any sort of organizational memory. I think you lose a lot. So, and that may be, my cognitive bias showing on that.
No, I'm probably with you on that. And I think that, I've had kind of the fortune of, having a company, founding it, selling it, working in a big corporate, doing that a couple times and now being back on the innovation side of a small company. But my experience is that, pretty much every organization now has an embedded analytic capability. Now, they may not call it that because it might be the 10 business analysts who report into the head of sales. But, I don't think you can survive in this day and age without analytics. I mean, just decision making is very much, we have all kinds of data. We need that data. We need to make our businesses more efficient. So I think it's everywhere.
So you're a serial entrepreneur, and this is not your first rodeo, so to speak. Why analytics, and what have you learned as a serial entrepreneur?
So I guess I got started in analytics by accident. So, when I graduated college, which was a long, long time ago, I had been playing around with computers while I was in school, and I got working for a nonprofit. And the nonprofit had all kinds of membership information, which is, at that time handled in a very paper way. And I kept saying to the founder, I said, we just got to automate this. And finally one day she said, oh, just shut up and go do it. And that took me from the world of nonprofits to the world of software. But the immediate problem was, how do we answer questions about our membership? And it was trying to understand which members are more likely to renew, which ones are not going to renew, who's going to give us more money, et cetera. And that just got me curious about that. And I ultimately left that nonprofit and went to work for a small consultancy, which was doing work for AT&T during divestiture. That ages me quite a bit. And the problems there were about answering questions with data, and that got kind of into it. And so, I got into data and what became data warehousing very early. And the process of data warehousing took me into more and more complicated analytic endeavors, ultimately to using machines to help make better predictive decisions, which now is, everybody's calling AI. We used to call it just statistics. And that, kind of took me down the path. So I started out, analyzing data. I went to a consultancy where we were building more and more complex data. And I saw an opportunity, I thought was an opportunity to build reusable componentry to do that. And that started my second company, which was G4 Analytics, which was a 10-year endeavor, which ultimately sold to Nielsen, which is a big data processing company. And by then I was fully ensconced in analytics and really wasn't really going anywhere else. But I see it as just a component of business, is that it's decision making, and decision making is really kind of fun. And how do you inform better decisions? That's kind of what got me where I am.
But you've started X number of companies and versus living in the corporate world. I mean, heck, when you sold G4, you could have just, stayed in the corporate world rather than spinning up your next venture. What drives you to start new organizations? And what advice would you then say? Is that something that you'd recommend to people who listen to the podcast?
Yeah. So I think in my case, right, it's my curiosity of the problem outweighed my desire to traverse the heights of corporate America, right? And you could be more powerful perhaps by traversing those heights, but sometimes the act of getting ahead is more important than the act of building a better mousetrap or making a better decision. And, so I think it's not unusual for an entrepreneur who gets absorbed into a corporation, which I've done now twice, to reach a point where it's no fun anymore because they're children of the process now, as opposed to, kind of the ideas and, pushing the boundaries of ideas. So for me, it just kind of was inevitable that I had a really good time. I went to, when I formed G4, we did that for 10 years, sold it to Nielsen. I was at Nielsen for 6 years, and it was a great ride. But, I left because it was time for me to go back and do something else. And I actually took what I thought was going to be the next big step for me, which was to become a chief technology officer for a big global retail services company. And similarly, I got involved in the process of managing a big team and having, kind of $100 million budget. And I just wanted to go try out my ideas again. So that took me back to do it. In terms of advising people, I would say, I've heard this analogy of people asking about acting, right? Should I be an actor? And the answer was, kind of given was, well, no, because if you have to ask, you shouldn't do it, right? And I almost feel that way about entrepreneurship. I mean, I love it. It's been great for me, but if it's not something that innately you feel compelled to do, then be careful, right? Because it's the one place, not the one place, but it is one place where almost every business runs into trouble at some point, maybe multiple times. I've been there multiple times, same company sometimes. And as an entrepreneur, when you're in trouble, you've got to be the one to double down on your risk, right? And everything about, kind of risk and investing says when you're in trouble, well, you spread your risk, right? Because that's how you protect yourself. But you can't do that as an entrepreneur. You reach the difficult point. If you're not the person who's going to sign for your house, then who else is going to give you the money, right? So I think it's a great and exciting place to be, but I think you do it because you love the ideas and you have a passion for that, and you're not, you're willing to put yourself completely on the line, which you'll have to do more than once.
Fair. Been there, done that. And it's interesting. I think everyone I've asked this question to, and I've had a few serial entrepreneurs on the podcast over the years, really do boil down to it's about the idea. And, lots of different probably adjectives floating around and slightly different variants on that. But running the team of 4,000 people is not about the idea. And that's a common thread. Rick, this has been marvelous. If you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you your morning caffeinated beverage of choice and a magic wand. We might discuss why people are handing you magic wands when you first wake up, but, we don't need to go there. And you had the power to change any two things as they affect the whole world of analytics. What would those two things be and why?
So the first is I would really get it away from this pure engineering view. I'd recognize it evolves, and I'd focus on the collaboration concept. And I would, really see this as a team sport in a way that, it still isn't. These engineers and analysts, they don't work together well enough today. We're certainly trying to build a framework to do that, but I think that's probably the thing I would change the most. The other thing I would just probably do, which isn't so much direct as indirect, is that I would introduce more clarity around thinking about data into our public education system. And because I think that we get overwhelmed with information. We're seeing a lot of places where people are biasing information, using that as a weapon to promote, one idea over another. And I think just it's become almost, civics that I think people need to understand how information is used and processed. So I'd love to see more of that in our schools.
Well, data is civics. I think that's, I've been taking notes. If you haven't noticed, there's been a lot to this interview. Rick Hall, CEO of Aginity. This is marvelous. How would people continue the conversation if they wanted to?
Sure. So, certainly we have a website, aginity.com, and we have a set of tools, and you can go there and check them out and download them. You can reach us on our website. We're active on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. I'm on LinkedIn, so I am always interested in talking to other people about, analytics and innovation, and also to aspiring entrepreneurs. I've had a lot of good support along the way, and I try to support others. So I'm open to people reaching out to me directly.
As you know, this podcast has been, by the time this runs, we'll probably be closing in on the end of our 14th year. And so it's been around for a while. All of those still are available. But at the end here, I open up the platform to promote anything that you'd like. So, Rick, the platform's yours. Selling your car on eBay? Probably not the right answer, but...
Yeah, so, I'd just say, give us a check out at Aginity. If you're in the analytics space, you're an analyst or an engineer. Our whole model is what we call land and expand. So there's free software. You can download it. You can check it out. Try it. If it works for you, we hope you'll subscribe and, ultimately become a paying user. But for us, it's about, helping you do a better job with your analytic problems. And one of the things I think it's cool about software in general is this model of, instead of selling the chief technology officer and getting them to, push something down the organization, that more and more software is stuff that people can use easily, try it out. And if they like it, then more people will use it. And that certainly is our mindset at Aginity. And I would love people to check out our stuff and tell us what you like or don't like, and we'll try to improve it.
It's probably you need to know both, right? Absolutely.
We do. Yeah.
Rick, thank you very much. This has been marvelous. As I said, I've learned a lot, and I enjoy these kind of conversations.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tom.
The Software Process and Measurement Cast is the proud media sponsor of the DevOps Online Summit. Not to put too fine a point on it, one of the best ways to get your message heard is to speak. The crew at the DevOps Online Summit provides a phenomenal platform to network with fellow practitioners from all over the world. Start the journey to speaking at the DevOps Online Summit 2021 by submitting, link in the show notes, to speak. Let them know that the Software Process and Measurement Cast sent you. In Reread Saturday News, as we begin Chapter 6 this week, we have 4 more weeks in our reread of Great Big Agile, an OS for Agile Leaders by Jeff Dalton. We have 3 more chapters and then conclude with a few final notes before beginning Fixing Your Scrum, Practical Solutions to Common Scrum Problems. Link in the show notes. It's time to buy a copy of that book and start to get ready for the reread. Chapter 6, by the way, of Great Big Agile goes into detail on the performance circle affirming. This part of the Agile performance hierarchy, affirming, asks teams and organizations to continuously evaluate whether they're being effective and then take steps to improve. Remember, buy a copy, read along. Year 14 is a wrap with this podcast. Next week, we start the next 14 years. Thank you to everyone that's been part of the first 14. Next week, the Software Process and Measurement Cast will begin year 15 with a visit from Johanna Rothman. We talk about her 3 new books, and as usual, people, Agile, and the world in general. I could not ask for a better start to our podcast year. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?